All right, so we're gonna really cover 4 quick topics. I'm gonna give you some economist speak, so no one in the room but me might agree with it, but just to give you kind of how I'm grounding things when I look at the economics of mortality, some calculations, data considerations, then a barometer of mortality that I produce and generally follow, and then I think most importantly, some resources that have come directly out of this grant that hopefully can put in the hands of producers, stakeholders that can help move the needle when we talk about looking at mortality and improvements in mortality. So when I think about mortality, and a question being, is the optimal level of mortality greater than 0? It certainly is. And you can think about that as the marginal benefit or marginal return of improving mortality. At some point it flips. It costs more to save that last pig than that last pig is worth. And so for an operation, it's identifying what that optimal level of mortality is. And it's not easy because there's a lot of factors that go into that. So I might have an optimal level this year, which is going to be a lot different next year, and it was probably a lot different in 2020. So we're making cost-benefit calculations every time that we're doing that. Hopefully this helps motivate why we need some tools, some resources that individual producers can look at this situation. Now, when we go through and understand how people calculate mortality, some of it is sometimes, is it the total cost that's invested in that pig when that pig dies? And the answer is no. That ignores the opportunity cost. So I'm going to give you an extreme example here. And this should actually say, this should say April 2020. So a lot of people familiar with April 2020, right? It's quite a while ago, but it was pretty significant in animal agriculture in general, right? That was the last time we've seen major disruptions in processing, and we all understand what that did to pig prices. Well, you could get a cash wean pig, and I'm looking at the National Feeder Pig Report, for an average of about $5 to $6. Actually, there were some dollar trades, and in actuality, some pigs were worth nothing, right? Well, if we fast forward to October 2020, so 6 months later, roughly, when that pig would be finished, that $5 investment turned into 162 on average, and there was even kind of an upper range of about $180 per head on average. So if I look at the cost of mortality, if I just think about it as what I invested in, that extreme example, that's a lot different than what that pig is worth. So hopefully that motivates the thinking. It's all about opportunity cost when we think about the cost of mortality. Do fixed costs matter? Simple answer is no. Fixed or fixed, right? I'm still going to incur those fixed costs with smaller pigs. I'm just going to spread it out over fewer pigs. Now, what that impacts is economic efficiency and competitiveness long run. But it does not enter into the economic situation of the cost of mortality. Does mortality impact marketing weight? Or you could think about a lot of other decisions. And the answer is no. So think about this as sunk costs. Those are irrelevant to the decision-making process. I'm making decisions based on what I'm looking forward and the economic conditions going forward. So there it all goes back to, in economic speak, marginal cost equals marginal revenue. I understand there's a lot of other practical decisions that impact that. When we look at it straight from an economic standpoint, it's following that simple rule of marginal cost equals marginal revenue. Now this one gets a lot of debate. So does mortality affect supply, demand, and prices? And I'm Dr. Harold Holdkamp. We did a PigX podcast with this, and I think he explained this terrifically. So that's why I borrowed it here, because in that discussion, it really made a lot of sense to me of how we think about this and how economists can do a lot better job of explaining it. So we have a PERS example where this is always affecting supply, demand, and prices, right? But we're not recognizing it. And the way I think about that is if we eliminated PERS tomorrow, what would happen to the price of pigs if nothing else changed? It would plummet, right? Because demand didn't increase, so that can't help prices. All of a sudden, we have a glut of supply. But we don't look at it necessarily when we're modeling that. That's a different modeling process of understanding that. Now, a lot of times a market will work itself out, right, in layman's terms, and so we will see some adjustment over time. And the adjustment is, well, pig producers in the US would be even more competitive worldwide, right? So our supplies could increase because of our competitiveness worldwide. But you can think about it in a market standpoint, PERS is baked into those market prices through the supply and demand. Now, sometimes we do recognize, and I think PDV is a really good example of that. And the reason why is it's supply impacting and did not impact demand. And so in this case, you've seen the market have a risk premium in it, right? Futures prices went through the roof because there was a lot of uncertainty about how big the impact of PDV would be. Now, when you look back on production, it was roughly about 3%. Weights increased. Mortality wasn't as large, maybe as thought in the height of the concern or when it first broke out. So actually, producers did better off than maybe they anticipated, especially if they didn't have much production disruption. Now, if they had a high enough mortality, then you could have actually seen them worse off because it didn't matter how high the price was. If I'm multiplying it by a small quantity, I get lower returns. So when I calculate mortality, or how I'm going to present it here, this is just a function of that percent mortality, the value of the finished pig, and then we're going to make some adjustments. And the easiest adjustments to think about are feed, right? There's some feed cost savings because I'm not feeding that hog to market weight. And when I think about the savings, if it's going to die, when would I rather have it die? Early on, right? Because I save a lot. And in prices like 2021, that mattered a lot, right? Feed costs are a lot higher than they have been the last several years. Marketing, another one, right? If I'm not marketing a finished pig, I'm not incurring a cost there. And I would say that this generally follows, and I'll go back to my alma mater, K-State, kind of have laid this out in a lot of their budgets when you think about the cost of mortality. So I borrowed that and brought some of these calculations to Iowa State. Now, USDA actually does publish a death loss estimate. And why this is interesting is, there was a lot of debate about how big the depopulation, euthanasia was in 2020, right? Well, we don't know that exactly because USDA is just calculating death loss, but I can tell you from their estimates, and it's an estimate, we've seen about 1.7 million head more death loss in 2020 than we did in 2019. Now, the first thing you're going to tell me is, well, we had a new strain of PERS, right? And so that certainly contributed to that. But also, there's a lot of other factors that contribute to that increase. Now, if I compare that to our pig crop, national grow finish, so wean to finish, post-weaning mortality, was 9.8% in the US, based on USDA data. And this is annual data. You'll see that that's the highest rate that we see. This is very correlated with the size of the pig crop and slaughter levels that we see. So not surprising that we've seen increased death loss because we're producing a heck of a lot more pigs, right? When we go back even 5 years ago. So I told you that cost of mortality depends on the value of the finished pig. Well, most time those values are pretty correlated, right? Now they do vary year to year. So obviously in 2014, it's going to be some of the highest costs of mortality because the pigs were worth the most. 2020 might be some of the lowest, right? Because we've seen some of the lowest prices we've seen. But there's even more variation when we talk about individual producers. And that's the colors of those lines there. So negotiated hog sales, which I'll admit is only about 1 to 2% of sales, that impact of mortality, if that's the only way I sell hogs, is a lot different than someone that may be selling under a formula. And that's highlighted no better place than this USDA report here. So this is USDA's national net distribution of hog prices. And I cherry pick a particular date here because I wanted the widest distribution possible. So we go back to June 22nd, 2020. There were some hogs that were being sold for $13 to $15 per hundredweight. Those were negotiated hogs. That same day, there were some formula hogs that were getting $100 per hundredweight. Now, don't get me wrong, the cost to produce those hogs is much different, right? I think there's a reason why we see that tail of distribution there. But when we think about economics of mortality, this is impacting it considerably, right? Just the price that I'm receiving for those hogs. So if I'm investing the cost of production to produce hogs with certain attributes to get those premiums, that cost of mortality is a lot more to me than maybe someone that we can think about commodity hogs or hogs that maybe represent more of this distribution. And then feed cost is very important here, and I purposely put 2 in here. So the total cost is going to include those fixed costs. It's going to include sunk costs like the cost of the weaned pig. Those we're not considering. It's this red line being the major driver there, which is the feed cost. So when is the cost of mortality more expensive? Well, it's when I've invested more or I have the opportunity to save more in that feed cost. So a barometer of profitability that I produce at Iowa State is part of the estimated returns model. So this is a budget model. I like to think about it as not the absolute numbers aren't the important, but it's the change over time and looking at the trends. And so if I use USDA's percentage of mortality annually, so that'd be the blue line here, you'll see on average it's been about $9 since 2007, with quite a bit of variation, almost $18 in 2014, all the way down to around $5 or so as we look at some of the low-priced periods back to 2007. Now, just changing the percent mortality, so that's why I put the green 6% in here, obviously lowers that, but it still reacts to all those major factors that I've already talked about. The hog price, the feed cost, and those primary factors. So the question I get a lot, and this has been a lot of internal questions during grant meetings, when we've had our stakeholders in there, that have always got pushed back, because that's what I usually talk about the front end of this presentation. But they want to get to this. So what's the cost of obtaining an X percentage point change improvement in mortality? And it wouldn't be an economics talk if I didn't tell you it depends, right? But the value also depends too, and hopefully I've convinced you of that. And hopefully I've convinced you that this is going to be different for every producer. And also, rarely do we ever observe both the costs and the benefits. If you did, you wouldn't need an economics profession necessarily, right? Anyone can do that math, right? Is benefits minus costs. If the benefits are better, we make the decision to go ahead and do it. If the costs outweigh the benefits, we got to figure out how to get those costs down or the benefits up, or otherwise not implement that change. But here, we don't know the value or the cost. But we can take one and back out the other. And that's what we've done here in this tool. So a major driver behind this is Russ Yukon. You can think about, he's the brains, he should get all the credit, and I can get all the blame here. Because this isn't a trivial task, as I've talked about. Both kind of laying out the economics and being very transparent, but also putting it in a usable spreadsheet for folks. And we also need to give credit to Ann Johans, who I'm almost embarrassed of the spreadsheet we gave her, and she made it look good, right? And made it that anyone can open it and not be overwhelmed with all the different calculations that go on. So here, I'm gonna just walk through a few snapshots of looking at this tool and show you how to maybe navigate it a little bit, but I would encourage you, this is something that you need to go home, open it, play with it, run sensitivity analysis, and work through individual situations, because that's really what the value of this is. Because I can highlight numbers here, but that may or may not represent your individual situation. So we have a very simple production information table that information needs to be inputted in. And the big one here is, well, we're gonna say my current operation, this is wean finish, is 6% mortality. I'm gonna improve it to 5%. So that's that percentage point increase. Now, maybe the weight of the pigs changes by that intervention. Your animal health professional would need to tell you that, probably. So I'm gonna naively assume it stays the same. Then you'll notice that the current operation here has pretty much all the other inputs. Well, the reason for that is this is a partial budget. So I want to look at just changing one thing on this operation, it's that mortality, and look at the value, and then I can compare it to the cost per head or per operation when someone's trying to sell something to me on an intervention. So when I look at that change from 6% to 5%, we model this on a per head and a per group basis. I'll talk just here about the per head. Well, when we go from 6% to 5%, you can think about this as a cost to my revenue or a reduction in revenue because I have fewer pigs to sell, 6% fewer pigs to sell. Well, I'm gonna see an improvement there. So instead of that reduction of almost $9, now it's about 7.5. That 1 percentage point reduction. We do include a manure value in here. You can zero that out. If you want to simplify that, or if you have some different values, you can put that in here. Then we look at a cost savings. And so this one takes a little bit of thinking to think about. Well, our feed here, $2.43, that's the savings, but we actually gonna feed more because we have more pigs, right? So we have less savings, but that's a good thing because I can market 1% more pigs. So we're giving up a little bit in the value proposition there, but in aggregate, it's about $1.04. So 1 percentage point change is worth about $1 when we look at this. Now, the value in these types of tools is the sensitivity analysis. So here, what if we change hog prices? Well, if hog prices are better, that value becomes more, right? Because each one saved is worth a little bit more. Now, if I reduce mortality and increase hog value, my biggest bang for my buck then, you can think about 2014 or 2021, is that's what I need to that's when I'm gonna really need to focus on health or saving those additional pigs. Now, feed price, as feed becomes less expensive, there's an opportunity there to improvement on a net income basis. And that's a lot because of the sunk cost part of it, right? Because I'm giving up some expensive feed, And I would say similarly when we look at feed efficiency. So anything that's going to help reduce cost will improve net income and part of that value calculation. So short, simple, sweet, hopefully gave you some resources and gave you something to look forward to. So we're in the process of developing similar resources for breed to wean. And as Ron showed you, that calculation's a lot more difficult, right? Because there's a lot more factors at play, especially when you look at the opportunity cost and the cost savings potentially in a breed to wean. So we thought we'd bite off maybe a bit easier one and then tackle the next one, but it is in progress, and we hope to share that soon. So thank you, and I think we got time for a break now.